Hello, I'm Bill Detweiler, Managing Editor of ZDNet's sister sites Tech Republic and TechPro Research. We're talking today with Jim Douglas, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Wind River, about the Internet of Things. Now, when we say the Internet of Things, we're basically talking about machine-to-machine communication. This could be machines in a factory, a smart thermostat in your house, or even sensors in your clothes, all generating data and talking to each other. And according to analysts, by 2020, there could be hundreds of billions of these connected things. Now, because Wind River creates the software and components that enable all these things to connect and communicate, I know that Jim can take us behind the hype and help us understand what this IoT phenomenon really means for today's businesses and the role that technology plays. So thanks for joining me, Jim.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bill.
All right, so let's cut right to the chase. Let's try to cut through the hype right at the beginning. What's the real value of the Internet of Things to businesses? Why should, organizations and people care about the Internet of Things?
Well, I used the word hype to start. I think a lot of the hype's because people are talking about value creation in the trillions. One of the more elaborate studies I saw was by Cisco, where they looked at new revenue streams that are potentially generated through IoT, cost savings and productivity, and they're talking on the order of $19 trillion with a T, Bill.
Wow.
That gets people excited. What gets me excited personally is business transformation. A lot of the media is focused now on consumer-oriented devices because those are sexy, but kind of the mainstream Rust Belt industries are where things are going to be really fascinating. There's a great potential for rejuvenation of a lot of mainstream industries.
So you just mentioned it process a little bit already. So in terms of practical business processes, how can businesses optimize their processes with the Internet of Things?
Well, it's all about trying to liberate data and really maximize the value of the assets they've got deployed. When I go out and talk to C-level executives, typically they talk about kind of two phases. The first phase is really all about optimization. How do I optimize the assets I already have deployed? So think for a minute about people that make big air conditioning units, for example. It could be on a building like where we are here in New York. It could be on an industrial setting. For them, biggest cost after those are deployed are maintaining them, right? So anything they can do to drive down that cost. Last thing they want to do is send a technician out, a truck roll as they call it. That's very expensive. So if they can remotely start to do health monitoring and over time start to gather enough information off that device where they can do things like predictive maintenance,
right,
they can drive down that operational cost. Obviously, there's a peripheral benefit for the customers, right? Because they've got more uptime. So that's really phase one. And that's where today where most executives are focused. Second phase is where it gets really interesting. That's where they look for new opportunities to generate new revenue streams. And in a lot of cases, recurring revenue streams. Think about that same scenario. They sell the equipment or lease the equipment and maybe they've got a maintenance contract, but that's the extent of the monetization. Now, if I could take the information off that device, I could put that together with information like weather patterns or potentially spot energy prices. Think about a scenario where you've got a weather pattern coming in where you're going to have a spike either up or down and you're going to have to change the temperature of that building. If I knew that was coming and I knew what the power prices look like to acquire energy, then I can really modulate how I'm going to cool that building or heat that building and drive down the cost for my customer. Now, would you pay for that if you're running a big operation like that, a big building? Of course you would.
In what market segment or segments does Wind River see the most opportunity for the Internet of Things? And what are some of the key opportunities in those segments?
You said earlier about billions of devices. Well, think about it. There's 7-ish billion people on the planet. So those hundreds of billions of devices aren't going to be on people or attached to people in a lot of cases. They're going to be more in industrial settings. And there's a great opportunity for those companies to really change the nature of how they prosecute their businesses. For Wind River, it's particularly exciting. If you look at where we're deployed today, we're in about 2 billion devices around the world, and even outside of this world. We've got 100% market share on Mars today. So it's a great opportunity that lines up really well with where we are today in terms of market penetration.
Okay. So speaking of all those devices, not all of them are going to be new, right? And more than 85% of the existing devices in the marketplace are based on legacy systems, and they're not connected. So how do we get all those legacy systems to become part of the Internet of Things ecosystem?
No, this is the big challenge, Bill. We typically talk about this notion of greenfield and brownfield, where greenfield are devices you can purpose build for the Internet of Things. And brownfield, to your point, right, it's everything else, that 85% that were never made to see an enterprise network. So in a lot of cases, folks are looking at kind of 3 steps. The first step is, are there standardization activities that you can undertake that are going to help you prepare your devices? In a lot of cases, it's around software. They may have a plethora of operating systems, for example, so they'll standardize on one base set of software on all those devices. Second, obviously, is connectivity. A lot of the devices weren't made for connectivity, so in a lot of cases, you either have to add connectivity or they've got a disparate set of protocols, so you've actually got to add an intermediate type of device like a gateway. And this is one of the products that we've built with our parent company Intel, is a very robust gateway that'll help you connect these disparate devices and ensure that they can, in a secure basis, be able to connect into an enterprise network in the internet. Third phase is all about manageability, right? First of all, you want to make sure that when a device attempts to get on that network, it's allowed to. You want to make sure it gets on okay. You want to be able to monitor its health. And then over time, you want to be able to manipulate how it operates, right? So you can optimize how it's operating in field.
So security is obviously a concern for organizations, and
Absolutely.
as you said, especially when it has real consequences beyond privacy for safety of individuals. Can you elaborate on those security issues, and then how should businesses approach security when it comes to the Internet of Things?
I always love this question because it's ironic. You know, for the last 30 plus years, we've been helping people build things that absolutely can't fail. And part of that is keep them away from enterprise networks. And now we're trying to do the opposite. So we think we're especially, well equipped to help people do that. I think the starting point is people have to think about security holistically. You can't think about a particular point in the chain and optimize for it. You got to think about the whole system and ensure that you've got security at every point. From the minute power touches that system to you have an application boot up on it to it touches a network, you've got to think about all the potential failure points. The hard part is, as a consumer, whether or not you're buying industrial equipment or you're buying a Fitbit, you typically don't want to pay a premium for security. You expect it, right? So the hard thing for companies is, where's that line where I stop? Because security is expensive to implement. So you've got to figure out where that line is. But the starting point is think holistically as a system, and then you've got to figure out what's good enough so you can get products to market fast at price points that matter.
So it's always a risk-reward equation that you're working out. How much can we spend, are we willing to spend to reach a certain level of security? And I would assume that not every device has to be as secure as the next device next to it. So what you might think of as privacy is a little bit different than power generation in a facility, oil and gas drilling, healthcare operations, things like that, right?
And I hate to say it, it's all about liability. I mean, one of the most interesting but alarming lines I heard, we had an executive forum a couple of years ago, and we had somebody that was out of the medical device industry, and he had made a comment that they hadn't had a catastrophe event with connected devices yet. And so the level of security they were building in wasn't as high as some of the industrial devices. And people around the room looked at him like, you got to be kidding me. You're talking about health equipment. But it's economics at the end of the day. So they've got to figure out where that line is in terms of liability and make sure they secure around it.
So with all the additional things on the internet, with all these additional communications moving back and forth across the network, is the current network infrastructure up to handling all that additional data, all that additional communication?
Yeah, one of the hidden problems people don't talk about, and this is another area of focus for Wind River. If you look at a lot of that data, at some point it's going to go over to carrier networks, and carrier networks are going through a big transition, right? Obviously, there's been a big swap between voice traffic and data traffic, and their big challenge has been kind of twofold. Obviously, how do you drive down the cost to handle that capacity? And they know how to do it technically, but there's a constant kind of push to drive down cost. The bigger problem has been monetization, right? How do they actually make money with all that data going through the network? They don't have the models in place. And so they're looking at new ways where they can add new services rapidly to their network. So the big push in the industry right now is around virtualization. We saw that happen in data centers years ago, where they started virtualizing applications to really get more leverage out of the hardware infrastructure. And they're looking to do the same thing too within carrier networks. And there's a new buzzword called network functions virtualization, where they effectively can take applications that used to be tethered or dedicated to proprietary hardware that was designated for that app to run on, to be able to run on a virtual machine. And that virtual machine basically can reside anywhere in the network. And the real benefits are twofold. Obviously, they can get new services onto the network quicker, And then from a cost perspective, they can drive that application to run where they've got available bandwidth so they can drive their costs down. This is going to be enormous for the telecommunication industry. We've got companies right now, service providers with proof of concepts going on, looking to put trials in place in early and late 2015, and we're expecting a really big spike in terms of activity as we get into 2016 and 17. So for Wind River, this is a real complementary focus for us, ensuring that we've got the technologies that are going to enable these applications to run in a virtualized mode on networks.
So this is part of that software-defined networking or software-defined everything these days, right?
Everything, and it's really a companion. You hear two buzzwords, SDN, which is software-defined networks, and NFV, and SDN really grew up more out of the IT enterprise space. What we're seeing is there's, once again, a confluence of those technologies. Some of the principles around orchestration of how you orchestrate data on a network are bleeding out of the IT shop and into the telecommunication networks.
You know, let's shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
Let's talk about standards, because whenever there's a new technology, whenever there's something new in the marketplace, standards versus legacy equipment versus what new manufacturers are creating now is always important. What still has to happen in terms of standards with Internet of Things for the current growth forecasts to continue the way they are? I mean,
the challenge is that when we talk about Internet of Things, as we talked earlier, it's very fragmented, right? It's
got a lot of manufacturers doing a lot of different things
in many disparate markets. So I think it's Pollyanna to think that we're going to have broad standards that are going to cut across all industries. So what we're seeing is the emergence of standards groups within vertical markets that are trying to look at kind of the low-hanging fruit and try to knock off the things that are going to be the biggest impediments that are easy to solve. The Industrial Internet Consortium is a good example of that. At the end of the day, my personal belief, though, is companies drive standards, not consortium, right? So the market movers are the ones that are going to determine standards, and what we'll see is those emerge more on a vertical market basis.
Right. So the winners write history, right?
Exactly.
So do you think that you will see standards for healthcare, standards for industrial, standards for consumer just emerge naturally through whichever products sort of perform the best in the marketplace? Is that
you already are. It's already happening today. Like I said, there are some consortium coming together, but they're led by the winners, right? They're the folks that are going to define the market.
Okay, let's talk about timing a little bit. What's your prediction in terms of the timing for a cohesive Internet of Things ecosystem? Are we 10 years away? Are we more, less?
Well, the funny thing is we're already there to an extent. So think about Apple, think about your cable providers. These guys have a completely cohesive ecosystem today. The difference is they own it, right? They own it from
It's a walled garden.
Absolutely. But it works, right? Everything works in an Apple environment. Everything works in your cable environment. Your set-top box for years, if you've got a satellite dish, for example, if you've got a problem, right? You get on the phone with these guys. They're going to call and they're going to do diagnostics remotely on that device. They're going to download a software patch. So it's there today. But as I said, the walled garden. The hard part is where you don't have the walled garden. And that's where we're seeing the drive to standards and people really looking at how they can effectively, back to that brownfield environment, start to adopt the technologies necessary to create an IoT ecosystem. My own take is, the next 5 years, we're going to see a big movement. I think people are looking, as you talked earlier about, in the next decade, hundreds of millions of connected devices. It's going to ramp slow the next few years, but then it's going to explode.
Take off.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's kind of three things that I look at that I think are enablers. I talked at the beginning about kind of a confluence of technologies. If you look at these three things, so silicon right now, you've got it down to price points where you can get enough performance to have intelligence on devices, where in the past it just wasn't economically feasible. The second thing, it seems obvious, but connectivity. Connectivity used to be expensive. Now we take it for granted. Everything's
cheap, ubiquitous.
Yep. Third one is cloud. Think back 5 years, absolutely unavailable to most companies. Now you or I pick up the phone in 5 minutes, call up AWS, Amazon services.
Right.
You've got, huge amounts of information in the cloud that you can attain. So those technologies, as I said earlier, have become economically practical to scale. And they're really going to help drive the growth curve, if you will.
Well, Jim, thanks for joining me. It's been a great conversation. And thank you to our sponsor, Wind River. I'm Bill Detweiler. Thanks for watching.